Okay, there we go. Apologize for those technical difficulties we had. I'm Andy Theron with the Gay Liberation Network, and with me here tonight is Patrick McWilliams of the Answer Chicago Coalition.
That's right.
And we're going to be talking about the inaugural coming up of, yes, it's hard to say it, President Trump coming up on January 20th, because there's big protests that have rocked this city immediately after the election on November 8th. The night after, over 10,000 people flooded down to in front of the Trump Tower. In fact, people marched in the thousands on Lakeshore Drive that night, and there were many other protests immediately after that. The Answer Coalition, to its credit, led the call for that first protest, as well as other protests that have taken place. And Patrick, why don't you give our watchers here a little bit of information about why Answer Coalition took this initiative?
Oh, absolutely. And first, thank you so much for having me here. I mean, we think, Trump represents kind of the ascendancy of this far-right coalition here in the United States. Now, that isn't to say that the things that Trump represents, racism, sexism, homophobia, and bigotry, they of course didn't start with Donald Trump.
Right.
As we know, these things have been present in our nation for a long time. But Trump does represent certainly a new development here. The open racism, the open sexism that he's promoting has really brought, I think, a new stage of these struggles here. And so what we're trying to do is to bring as many people as possible out together in the streets, as has been going on with, as you mentioned, the very large street demonstrations, in order to have a massive show of resistance against Donald Trump, in order to organize people for defense of the communities who are likely to be most under attack under Trump's administration.
Right, and we're going to be getting a little bit more into the conversation in a few moments, but first I'd like to make some important announcements, and I also point out that the number at the bottom of your screen there, 312-738-1060, if you want to call in and make a brief comment or question, we'll certainly entertain that to the extent that we can. But before we get into any of that, I'd like to point out a few important announcements. We're coming up to the 29th. Let's see, again, technical difficulties here. We're not getting our overheads working here, so people in control room can work on that. Sorry about that. We seem to be having a lot of bad luck tonight with our technical matters here. There we go. Okay. What I was pointing out is this is Chelsea Manning, who, for those who don't know, is probably the most impactful LGBTQ activist alive today. Chelsea Manning is a whistleblower who courageously exposed U.S. war crimes in Iraq, Afghanistan, exposed the fact that the Obama State Department, including Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, knew about the impending coup in Honduras that resulted in the murders of dozens of LGBT activists and probably thousands of activists from other fields. She was imprisoned for leaking this to WikiLeaks, and unfortunately, she is now the longest-serving whistleblower in U.S. custody. And on her 29th birthday, the Gay Liberation Network here in Chicago, as well as activists around the world, are going to be organizing vigils because with the end of the Obama administration, as with all administrations, is really the best opportunity frequently to get a commutation of the sentence. So at 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, just a week from tomorrow, we ask you to join us at the corner of Roscoe and Hall Street to ask the Obama administration to commute her sentence to time served. And the next announcement I'd like to give is something that's very near and dear to, oops, we just lost that for some reason. If people, there we go. People in our control room, we're having some problems here, sorry about that. The protest against Trump will be taken to a new level, not only here in Chicago, but in Washington, D.C. And Patrick, the Answer Coalition is in the thick of that. Say a few words about what's going on.
Absolutely. We are, as you said, organizing, we're trying to organize a massive protest to bring tens of thousands of people out into the streets in D.C. on January 20th. And to that end, we are also organizing buses for people who would like to go from here in Chicago. To figure out how you can get on the bus, you can go to our page at answerchicago.org. You see it up on your screens. Or find us on Facebook at Answer Chicago. Just so people know, we're going to be leaving the day before, Thursday, at 3 p.m. from Chicago. We're going to drive all night, protest Trump, shut down the city while he tries to have his party there, and then we'll be leaving back to come back to the city the same day.
And I should note that you're not going to have to worry about hotels or anything like that. I can tell you from personal experience, it is damned hard to get a hotel room in D.C. right now. I'm going to be going by different means. I'm also going to be participating in the Women's Rights March the day after the inaugural, for those of you who are able to make it there and stay through January 21st. But the Answer buses are going to be leaving from Chicago the day before the inaugural. That'll be Thursday, January 19th. And really, your easiest way to get there, frankly, would be to get on one of those buses. So I encourage people to check out the answerchicago.org website. Now, let's take a couple steps back, Patrick, because even though we haven't gotten the new administration yet, the D.C. authorities have refused permits for any anti-Trump forces along the entire inaugural parade route. This is an unprecedented action, and we should remind people we're not in the new administration yet. We're in the old administration, and they're playing these games with the First Amendment. What's your thoughts about that? I know that you're very involved with the Center for Constitutional Rights and others that work on issues like these.
Yes, to speak to that just for a moment. So what's going on is the National Park Service, the ones who issue the permits in D.C. For protests like these, they have had a blanket, an omnibus, they're calling it blocking permit. What they're essentially saying, even though the Answer Coalition, we applied for permits months ago, even before the election, but now they are saying that the Trump inauguration team basically gets first dibs, to put it that way, on every single protest location. They've also added locations, including the sidewalk now in front not be allowed. So we are fighting this in court, and we hope to win, but regardless, we are going to be in D.C. permanent now.
And I think it should be noted, people should not be frightened about this whole issue of permits. This is something that has been commonly done. We saw it here in 2012 with a protest against NATO where our permits were denied. And our message to the city, and frankly our message to, speaking on behalf of myself anyway, the Gay Liberation Network, if you cancel people's First Amendment rights, people are going to show up anyway. And you have a choice as to whether or not you want things to be peaceful and orderly, or if you cancel people's First Amendment rights, as we saw here in Chicago in 1968 during the Democratic National Convention. People are going to show up anyway, and you're going to have the kind of disorder that you say that you're opposed to. Because people know enough about the Constitution that they know it is their right to peacefully assemble and protest. And if you cancel that First Amendment rights, why should people respect your authority? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. We saw that in the wake of the Laquan McDonald police shooting video release, where people rightfully saw that if the Rahm Emanuel administration was going to cover up for a police murder, which, by the way, is a felony. It's a felony accessory after the fact. And that's essentially what the entire top brass of the CPD, their press office, as well as Rahm Emanuel himself did, was cover up that murder. You are accessory after the fact. So if people march in the streets without permits and so forth, or on Lakeshore Drive, frankly, committing minor misdemeanors is chicken feed compared to the law breaking that we have seen in canceling people's First First Amendment rights is part of that.
Yes, very much so. And the First Amendment does not say that we need a permit to protest.
Right.
And that's, we are going to be there regardless, because we believe it's people's rights. Not only right, but in a situation like this, especially for people like us who are involved, we feel it's our duty to be there against Trump. And so that's going to continue despite their attempts to quash the First Amendment or not, though we do hope to win the legal challenges.
And as we continue the conversation, we're going to get some pictures of the first night's protests up on your screen here in just a second with our help from our folks in the control room here. If you're interested in participating in the conversation, please call us at 312-738-1060. We'll try and get you on the air. And again, here we're going to try and get some of these pictures up. See, they're helping us out there. This was right in front of the Trump Tower that first night. This is Lakeshore Drive. Thousands of people, and this was just the start of the march. Right after this, my cell phone died. Battery ran out, but thousands of people marched on Lakeshore Drive because they're frankly ticked off that an admitted sexual assaulter was going to be our president, and a man who used racist epithets, calling all immigrants murderers and rapists and so forth. People were legitimately upset with this. Most of the people were quite young. Many of them not even old enough to vote, so you can't blame them for not voting perhaps what you think the right way was. You see, this is the kind of future that we hope for. There's young people getting involved on their own behalf in favor of political activity. This is always what's been the way that social change has been made in our country. And so this is a very promising development. This wasn't just this one night. It happened several nights in a row in ensuing weekends. Here was a speak out here just short of Lakeshore Drive. The police stopped us at this point. A little later that evening, people did manage to get onto Lakeshore Drive and march, as you saw. And so this, I believe the fact that people are expressing such disgust with both parties really represents a political opportunity. What are your thoughts about that?
I think so too. I think what these protests have shown so far, we've seen tens of thousands of people, not only here in Chicago but across the nation, coming out in massive shows of rejection of Trump's right-wing and reactionary agenda. And it's no surprise. I mean, the people don't want Trump. This is clear even, if you look at the fact that it was a minority of people, when we're talking about the actual population of this country that actually voted for Trump. And then you see that in, as you say, many young people, multinational coalitions coming together out into the streets, standing together and saying no to Donald Trump, saying that, we are not going to let 1 inch of his agenda go into place without a fight every step of the way. And I think that is the election of Trump obviously is sort of kind of shaken a lot of people, and it's presented this moment where I think people are starting to realize the power they have outside of politicians, when people can come together in the streets, fight to defend our communities, and fight to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that a lot of people felt that there was no choice in this election. That for example, Palestinians, who do you go for when both Hillary Clinton as well as Donald Trump basically totally prostrated themselves before the AIPAC coalition? You had situations where the current administration has deported a record number of immigrants, more than any other president in U.S. history, and that really paved the way, created the political climate where someone like Donald Trump could rise, even though there's almost no Mexican immigrants coming into the United States for the last several years due to the economy and so forth. But you also had, the Black Lives Matter protests that were primarily against Democratic Party mayors, and so people were totally soured with the Democratic Party, especially since they had a standard bearer who played a key role in the mass incarceration binge back in the 1990s.
Oh yes, very much so. And I mean, because you're seeing Trump obviously, did not come out of nowhere here. For 40 years in this country, we've had declining wages for working people, while those at the top continue to get richer and richer. You know, we've seen the U.S. engaging in just sort of a state of permanent warfare abroad, with no end in sight at all. And this is, you know, like you said, something that has been going on regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, you know, in the White House.
And I think it's even more important for people to see is a systemic problem. One of the things that really irritated me the most was a lot of political organizations talked about, you know, George W. Bush this, George W. Bush that, and they didn't talk about the Democrats the same way, certainly during the last 7 years. And the point is, it's a system.
Right.
And the system has produced two horrible candidates that are the most loathed candidates in U.S. history, according to any number of measures. And it was a system that prevented Bernie Sanders from gaining. It wasn't just individual Democratic officials. And I think that the lesson that we need to take from this is that we can't take over their apparatus. We can't use their allegedly democratic, however imperfect, institutions, whether to take over the Democratic Party or over the U.S. government. And I think this is where a lot of people, with their illusions that even the Green Party or whomever could miraculously, if they had, you know, if we just get rid of you know, Citizens United or whatever, if we just tinker around the edges. But it fails to understand what this government is set up to do. It's to keep us in place.
I think that's very true, very true. And you know what you're seeing now is I think a lot of people though are now kind of realizing that they're kind of coming to that consciousness, and you know the slow sort of grind of basically this system of low wages has been doing that to people's minds for a long time, and now you know kind of a switch has been flipped, where people are realizing that no, we can't depend on the Democrats to defend us from this.
I mean, we've been dealing with a bully here locally, Rahm Emanuel, before him daily. So we should have some experience with the fact that that bullies come from both parties, but also that bullies can be forced to do things that they don't want to do, whether it's the firing of Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy, you know, Anita Alvarez out the door. But we shouldn't fool ourselves that these are really systemic changes, but they can be forced to do the things that they, and I think that's the promise that we have to hold out, that the last time there were two candidates as loathed as these two last ones we had was actually in 1968 here, Hubert Humphrey versus Richard Nixon. And people were so disgusted with both, especially if the cracking of heads by Daley's police force, the people came out on the streets. In the next several years, they made their own history in spite of Richard Nixon.
That's right.
And so I think that the message that I would like to share is that resistance is not futile, to borrow a cheesy Star Trek phrase, that we can defeat right-wingers. Like, our last couple minutes here, the question of fascism is a term that's thrown around on the left often, basically is a term of abuse. Your thoughts?
Well, so, as you say, a lot of people do use the term. You hear them throwing it around a lot these days, especially with the election of Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump is a far-right ideologue. There's no question about that. But to characterize it specifically as fascism, which I've heard some people do on the left, I think is going a little premature at this point, to say the least. You know, under kind of a fascist administration, we might not be able to have this conversation right here.
Stormtroopers will be busting through that door on stage right now. And I think it diminishes, actually, the horrors of what fascism are. It means every political voice, not just you know Patrick's in mine, but every political voice is silenced under such a regime. And so, yes, it's horrible, the fact that we've got an outright misogynist, racist, homophobe as our president, but we can win.
Yes, we can.
And with that, we're going to have to be wrapping up here pretty soon. And with our help from people in the control room, I'm going to try and get some announcements up here on your screen. The first one is, again, get on the bus to D.C. You can go to www.answerchicago.org. chicagodemonstrations.org. Buses leaving on the 19th, and we'll be staying for the demonstrations, returning direct to you. You don't even have to worry about booking a hotel or anything. You just go to that website and you can figure out how to get on the bus from Chicago to DC. And then also, there's going to be a protest here in Chicago. That's right. Same day, January 20th. Can't make the trip. Please come out 5 p.m. in front of Trump Tower, Friday, January 20th. Okay, 5 p.m. right after work. Get out there. You don't want to miss this one. The last several protests, thousands of people, and I'll bet you, just looking at the Facebook events about this, it's going to be huge. So make your way out there. Get off work early if you need to or whatever. Again, that's protesting Donald Trump's inauguration here in Chicago. And then next up, we've got, coming up a week from tomorrow, Chelsea Manning's 29th birthday, LGBTQ whistleblower. Let's help move and push the Obama administration, demand that that the Obama administration commute her sentence to time served. She is the longest serving whistleblower in U.S. Custody right now. Come out Saturday, December 17th for that. And then also, people have been hearing about our City Council Open Meetings Act lawsuit. The next court date on that is coming up in a few weeks' time as well. And with that, I'd like to close out our program with a few credits here.